The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. I'm the host of webinar. My name is Karen Mann, and I have my team with us, our webinar co-chair, Sadita, and Brooks, our division chair, and also the speaker for the day. We represent the Human Development and Leadership Division of the American Society for Quality. This is a global division aiming to enrich the personal and professional lives of our members and non-members, the global community. To trump over current and future challenges, we continuously look for new speakers within the range of our body of knowledge, which can be found in our website. We host monthly webinars. If you are interested or know someone interested, we would be happy to review their application. The Book of Knowledge can be found on our website, www.asqhdnl.org. Link is also shared on the chat at the bottom right-hand side. Before we begin the webinar, let me go over the housekeeping and some webinar rules. If there is any question, please type your question in the section for questions, and we will answer the questions accordingly. Webinar will be held for 45 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A for 15 minutes. If you want continuing education credit for 0.1 CEU, you have to be in the webinar for at least 40 minutes. You will receive a dedicated email from us, which you can save as PDF and send it to ASQ to claim your credit. Let me introduce you to the speaker, Mr. Brooks Catter. He's the principal of Catter and Associations in Cardiff by the Sea, California, and an adjunct professor of psychology at Point Loma Nazarena University. He earned a doctorate in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. He began his career as assistant professor of psychology at UCLA, and he has run both for-profit and non-profit businesses. He's the author of over 50 peer-reviewed journal articles and 2 books. Dr. Carter is a senior member of ASQ and chair of ASQ Human Development and Leadership Division. Brooks, this is so impressive. Can't wait to listen to you for the next 45 minutes. The floor is all yours.
I don't think I can live up to that, but I'll do my best. I'm a much better writer than presenter, so if this webinar doesn't reach you as well as it should, it's based on an article that came out in the January issue of Quality Progress called The Happiness Effect, and this is proof that it's there. Okay, I want to talk about Dr. Deming a bit. Dr. Deming talked about the knowledge necessary for leaders in business. And he talked about what he called the system of profound knowledge. And basically, the system of profound knowledge was a way of applying science to business problems. And this system of profound knowledge includes the theory of knowledge, which most of us try to avoid, theory of systems, laws of variation, and psychology. And we tend to think of variation as having much more to do with quality than the other 3 parts of the system, and I believe that's wrong. I first went to a Deming 4-day seminar in 1990, and there was a lot of material about variation. But at some point in the seminar, Dr. Deming said he had heard there were a number of PhDs in psychology in that session, and he asked us to come up during a break and talk to him, which we did. There were 7 of us. And he said, "What do you think? What do you think of this?" Well, we were a little bit taken aback, and I mumbled something. I was not very articulate. But I later had the opportunity to meet Dr. Deming, and it turned out he was quite interested in psychology, and I actually wrote a monograph about the applications of psychology to what he was talking about. And he read it, and he said, it was kind of long, and he said, chop this up and publish it in Quality Progress. So I duly joined ASQ, and I wrote my first article for Quality Progress, which was published in 1991, and a second article which was published in 1992. So I have a long history of applying psychology to quality. I had the opportunity to go to a number of other 4-day seminars. I think I totaled 6 before Deming passed away. And at some point he instituted a system where you would have an evening meeting hosted by a psychologist. He would sit in the audience and try to learn about psychology. And he was particularly interested in the psychology of change, obviously because he was aware that the technology of quality was not quite so difficult as getting people to adopt that methodology. Now, though he was very interested in psychology, he lived in the 20th century. Psychology was not very powerful in the 20th century. This is the essence of psychology in the 20th century. The most prominent psychologist was B.F. Skinner, whom I met and spent an evening with once, by the way, charming man. But he was more a subject of ridicule than of scientific excellence. And the other side of psychology was psychotherapy, which tended not to work very well. That's the psychology that Deming encountered, and he made the most of it. He was particularly interested in intrinsic motivation, which was somewhat known in the 20th century. Unfortunately, he didn't live in the 21st century and would have found psychology to be much different. In the 21st century, psychology has become a powerful science. This is a picture of Daniel Kahneman receiving a Nobel Prize. Kahneman was the first psychologist to win a Nobel Prize for his work in decision-making, cognitive psychology. I don't know which of these men is Kahneman, by the way, because they look alike. But one of them is receiving the award, and the other is presenting it. Kahneman changed the field of economics. Now 1 in 10 papers in economics is on behavioral economics. And what he studied was how cognitive biases cause people to make the wrong decisions. And this is another prominent psychologist. There are 2 psychologists living today who are probably dominate the field. One is Kahneman and the other is Martin Seligman. I knew Marty in graduate school. Marty founded the field of positive psychology, which is probably the most powerful application of psychology, much more powerful than anything that existed in the 20th century. I'll talk a little bit about positive psychology. Seligman was concerned that psychology dealt with deficits. And he was interested, and always been interested, in positive experience. And he defined positive psychology as being interested in positive traits like hope, wisdom, creativity, future-mindedness, courage, spirituality, responsibility, and perseverance. And he wanted to prevent pathology rather than treat it. Basically, positive psychology is about improving the quality of life for healthy people, relatively healthy people. Now, positive psychology is not new. Some great leaders understood positive psychology a long time ago. This is not going to be a plea for money. This is my favorite picture of George Washington. And George Washington apparently had a deep understanding of positive psychology. He didn't look that happy in that picture, but he did understand positive psychology. About 2 years ago, I gave a talk at a conference, a group called OPEX, pretty high-level conference. And after my talk, an executive of Siemens, a German man, handed me a document. And the document was a letter that George Washington had commissioned to be written to his captains in Valley Forge. And the winter at Valley Forge was pretty tough. And, excuse me, I have to get something out of the way here so I can read the letter. The winter was pretty tough, and Washington wanted to preserve the force. And this is the letter. A captain cannot be too careful of the company the state has committed to his charge. He must pay the greatest attention to the health of his men, their discipline, arms, accoutrements, ammunition, clothes, and necessaries. His first object should be to gain the love of his men by treating them with every possible kindness and humanity. Gain the love of his men. Doesn't sound like the Army. Inquiring into their complaints, and when well-founded, seeing them redressed. He should know every man of his company by name and character. He should often visit those who are sick, speak tenderly to them, see that the public provision, whether of medicine or diet, is duly administered, and procure them besides such comforts and conveniences are in his power. The attachment that arises from this kind of attention to the sick and wounded is almost inconceivable. It will, moreover, be the means of preserving the lives of many valuable men. I was rather surprised. I did some research to convince myself that this was a real letter and not something somebody wrote at a much later date. Now, the business that I encountered when I first went to work, which was in the summer of 1960, I had graduated from high school, was going to college, but needed a summer job to earn some money. And I worked in a Ford plant. And business was dominated in those days by a man named Charles Taylor, who around the turn of the century wrote a book on, quote, scientific management. This is a quote from Taylor. Hardly a competent workman can be found who does not devote a considerable amount of time to studying just how slowly he can work and still convince his employer he's going at a good pace. Now, this is a great picture of Taylor because he looks like the kind of creep who would say that. And he further announced that management determines the one best way to do the job, selects the best person for the job, trains that person proper methods, and applies economic incentives. He favored piecework. I remember Deming would at least once a day talk about how bad piecework was for people. But that's what Taylor wanted. Now, I did some research to figure out why Taylor said what he said. And Taylor's experience was in the iron and steel industry. And it turns out that the Bureau of Labor Statistics kept accident statistics even in those days. And when Taylor was working there, the fatality rate in that industry was between 2 and 3 men per 100 per year. Now, if I encountered that kind of work, I would work as slowly as possible, or hopefully not at all. And any sane person would work as slowly as possible. So Taylor may have been right in his observation, but he was wrong in his conclusion. I had my own experience with scientific management during my summer job in 1960. I worked for the Ford Motor Company. My father had been an executive, and so I was able to get a job in a Ford plant, which paid a lot of money. In those days, $2.55 an hour was a lot of money. And we made the world's most awful cars. This is what we were making, a Ford Falcon. And they were horrible. Now, I expected the workers to be a bunch of bums, exactly as Taylor described, because my father was a Ford executive, and he knew that was true. What I found instead was that the workers felt terrible about the rotten quality of the cars they were making. They were depressed about the quality of what they were producing. And they would often talk about prior jobs where they made decent stuff. A lot of them talked about a Fisher body plant in the area where the quality was good. Fisher body made the bodies for General Motors. And they were happy with the wage. In fact, they said, I have to stay because it pays well and I can support my family, but this is awful. And the men looked twice as old as they were. There was a lot of sabotage going on in the plant. Most cars finished their passage down the assembly line with dents. One day, somebody broke about every third windshield, and I did some kind of work in the car, and when I'd get inside the car, there was just a glass all over the place. People hated management. Management never talked to me, really. A foreman would tell me what job to do. The only time I had much contact with management was when I had a position where I had control of the line, and a car started to fall off the line because of the timing mechanism. And I stopped the line. I thought it would be bad if the car fell off the line. And the second the line stopped, about 50 people appeared screaming at me, telling me to turn it back on. And they managed to get the car back on the line and running smoothly. The people who struck terror into the hearts of workers were the supervisors, because they could fire people, and they rode around in golf carts. And I always got the feeling that it would be like the villain in a spaghetti western. There was a chill in the room when they rode by. They wore white shirts. Nobody else was allowed to wear a white shirt. No supervisor ever spoke with me, so that was good, because they didn't say anything positive to anyone. But it was a horrible environment. Now, Ford transformed itself through the offices of Dr. Deming, and the first evidence of the transformation was the Taurus, which was a very popular car. Probably most of you are old enough to recall the early Taurus. And after a lifetime of being subservient to General Motors, Ford became more profitable than General Motors and has been since that time. Interestingly, Ed Baker became a friend. He worked at Deming seminars, and he was the director of quality at Ford. And he told me one day that the thing he was most proud of was the relationships that developed between hourly workers and management. And he said it was common to see an hourly worker and a manager sitting sitting by side in a class studying the same thing. And Donald Peterson, who was the chairman of Ford, I believe, during that period, he wrote a book. It's a pretty good book. It's not been very popular, but he said that when he visited a plant, the thing he paid the most attention to was, did the plant manager know the workers? They needed to know everyone and really know them, not just know their names. And he said the one thing a plant manager could lose her job over would be to not know the workers. That was the primary measure of excellence. So it's nice that people are happy at Ford, and it's nice that George Washington made people happy, but does it really do any good? Does it make people better workers and better soldiers, or does it just make a more pleasant place to do that? I'll talk about some evidence that relates to this. Think about the best 100 companies to work for. Fortune magazine compiles a list every year of the 100 best companies to work for. Alex Edmonds studied the stock price of these companies, and he found that firms with high-level employee satisfaction generate superior long-horizon returns. This is a quote from him, even when controlling for industries, factor risks, and a broad set of other characteristics. Still, it's a correlational study. I don't find it very strong proof because it's probably, you're going to be happier if your firm is successful. So the cause and effect relationship may not be from happy employees to firm performance. It may be firm performance to happy employees. But we've collected some data over the years. I spent about 25 years working with a vice president of a major chemical company, developing a survey to understand safety cultures and diagnose problems, and it was a very effective process. A lot of our questions didn't say anything about safety, but they predicted safe performance. Here are four. I'm confident of the organization's future success. Employees trust the information that management provides about the organization. It's kind of scary when they don't. Managers treat subordinates with respect, and supervisors treat subordinates with respect. Now, you might not think that these would have anything to do with safe work. Certainly, they don't mention safety. They correlate powerfully with safety performance. And it's a little hard to figure that the cause and effect relationship is safe work causes managers to treat subordinates with respect. It's got to be the other way around. The way employees are treated influences their performance. And these are powerful correlations. I intended to make this a quiz, but we can't do it. But here are 11 drivers of employee satisfaction. All these correlate with employee satisfaction. Write down in the question box the one you think is most important. They're not in order here. They're randomized. Karen, can you see what's coming up?
I'm on it. We'll give it a second.
Are you in there, Karen?
Yeah, where you want to start the poll for you?
Social media relationships. We have job security, social relationships, quite many on social relationships. Opportunities for advancement, independence, job security. Yeah, majority in social relationships, work-life balance.
I don't have very many answers here. I've got work-life balance, job security. Social relationships, independence, opportunities for advancement, social relationships, social relationships, social relationships, culture of quality. Okay, well, you're on the right track. Number one is social relationships on the job. And number two is interesting job. And they account for about 60% of the variation. Everything else is very weak. The most important social relationship on the job is the relationship with one's boss. So Washington's letter to the captains is right on the money, creating a relationship between the captain and his soldiers. Pay is third, incidentally, and there's a long history of saying pay is not important, but these workers found pay was important. My view of pay is it has to be fair. You don't have to pay the most, but you have to pay fairly. Okay. Here's I'm going to make you take a test here. This is called the remote association test. What word fits with these three words? Okay, this is a simple one. Cheese. Cottage cheese, Swiss cheese, cheesecake. This is these remote association tests are typically used in tests of creativity. Okay. Dive like rocket. This is harder. If you came up with sky, you're a winner.
No.
Now I'm going to give you a third triad, and I'm going to ask you to tell me whether it's soluble or not. You can create three words that don't have a solution. So I'm going to ask you if it's soluble or not. And I'm going to give you a very brief amount of time to answer this, because I don't want you to solve it. I want you to intuit whether it's soluble. Put up the poll.
I launched a poll. Can you read for them the choices? The three words. So it's
How are we doing for
dream.
answers?
It's dream, ball, book. And the question is there any solution, yes or no? Can you hear me, Brooks?
Okay, close the poll.
Bruce, can you hear me?
Do I have to do something to show the results?
Can you hear me? It's Edita.
Okay. Interesting. 86% said yes, 14% said no. It is not soluble. It's the second time my results have gone contrary to the way it's supposed to work. Did anybody get a solution? If you got a solution, raise your hand. Wow, a lot of people think they got a solution. Oh, hold on, no. Okay, it turns out that people can solve these. People tend to get this right without a solution. And I'll show you the data in a minute. But what's happening here is insight. And in this test, your insight's not correct.
Brooks, can you hear me?
This is how the data work. Neutral is no pretreatment. This is their picking correctly coherent triads, and this is picking correctly incoherent triads. So there's a slight advantage in the white bar. If you give people a positive experience, and it was a simple manipulation, you ask them to recall a positive event in their life and think about it for a while. Give them the same test, and their competence increases. They're much better at this than they were in the neutral category. If you give them a negative induction and tell them to think about a bad event in their life, they can't do it at all. They're not significantly better than chance. Now, the experiment we just did is not being run the way theirs was. So our negative data don't disprove this, but I'm going to have to find out why the data are so negative, because I've done this twice and it comes out the same way. We don't have time to do the whole experiment, but this sub-experiment is interesting. The most important scientific results are the ones you don't expect. So I will follow up and find out. I'm teaching a research class, so I have a body of budding scientists who can test this and solve this problem for me. So I look forward to getting an explanation. Okay, positive psychology is pretty powerful. In 2008, General Casey, who was the Army Chief of Staff, the 4-star, called Seligman, the inventor of positive psychology, to his office. And he said we had terrible problems with returning troops. Post-traumatic stress disorder, divorce, depression, drug abuse. And he asked Seligman what positive psychology could do about this. Now, obviously, he had somewhat of an idea. Seligman said there were a lot of books on the table, and there were a lot of experts in the room. And so they knew positive psychology would have an approach. And Seligman suggested the resilience training, which he was doing with civilians, might work, and he suggested they do a pilot study. Casey said, look, we're in a war. We don't have time for a pilot study. We need a program. They gave University of Pennsylvania a $30 million no-bid grant because they were the only people who were capable of training at this level. And they trained 40,000 sergeants to train troops. That's as of 2017. So it took them a while to do that. Returning troops who had received the training had significantly less PTSD and less than half the rate of drug abuse compared to soldiers that did not receive the training. Now, by comparison, the behaviorists also contributed to the war effort. In World War II, Skinner trained pigeons to guide missiles, but the project never worked. The pigeons would guide missiles in a simulation, but they didn't do very good when they were flying around. So Seligman made a major contribution to the war effort, I would say, with this training. Another example, not on a slide. Seligman did a study where he gave positive psychology training, conventional therapy or conventional therapy plus drugs to depressed patients. 3 groups, matched groups. The conventional therapy produced remission in 20% of the patients. Conventional therapy plus drugs produced remission in 8% of the patients, which is rather interesting. And positive psychology therapy produced remission in 55% of the patients. Seligman several times applied for grants to study this at a level necessary to change the way depressed patients are treated. All the proposals were turned down, according to Seligman, because of the powerful lobby of the pharmaceutical companies, and actually psychiatrists have a pretty strong lobby as well. So what should quality do about this? I think the first thing to do is get an idea of what employee satisfaction is, its level. Deming always did that. He did it in an informal way. Get a bunch of employees in a room and find out what they thought. If employee satisfaction is low, you're not going to get anywhere with a quality program until you deal with that. And I'm currently working on a paper. Actually, it's in press. It'll come out in April on use of positive psychology and organizational change. Basically, it says build from the positive, not from the negative. Don't look for the deficits, look for the strengths and build on them. And that's all there is. I'm sure you'll have questions because I probably left out a lot.
Brooks, can you hear me? It's Adita.
Brooks, can you hear Sadita?
I was expecting Karen to be here for the questions.
Brooks, can you hear us?
Okay, somebody wants my email. Go to our website and you'll find it. That's ASQHD and &L.org. Karen, are you there?
Brooks, can you hear us? I think we're having a technical challenge. You're not able to hear us?
Hello?
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us, Brooks?
Cannot be completed as done.
Something's wrong with the system here.
Brooks, can you read the question?
Our apologies. I know I can see the question saying that you can hear us while Brooks can hear. And we need him so that he can answer the questions.
Okay. I found one more question. Somebody must have had a computer crash. Okay, was it one time or was it a mentoring program? No, it was a course. It was not a mentoring program. They trained 40,000 sergeants. They couldn't have mentored them. I support the hypothesis to leverage strengths. I think we're going to have to end because our moderator's gone.
We have actually unmuted our audience in case if you want to ask your question and see
I
if
apologize
Brooks
profusely,
can hear
but
you.
something happened to our moderator. Thank you for coming. We'll assign credit, and we'll shorten the time you had to be here because this didn't go as long as it should have. We still have 49 people here. Hello? I can't. There are virtually none. What happened?